vulnerable people to take their content away and sell it for profit, because trafficking has to have a purpose, you know. And so I want you to delve into, as we get into the nitty-gritties of how can we protect ourselves, or how, as journalists, because we are being accused so many times, including myself, that we are exposing children so much. Okay, we're exposing children to predators who can be able to take advantage of them. How can we start protecting children? By the content that you're creating, by how the way we are circulating the content that you are making, how our sources of news. So how can we start protecting children especially in the digital space?
I think I'll give you an example of a story that was being worked, a very interesting story that was being worked on last month by one of our journalists in Nigeria. And it wasn't a trafficking story, but it was a story about a young girl who had been sexually assaulted, and she was innocently very honest and very graphic about what this man had done to her. And what this journalist had done is that she had written verbatim everything in that particular story, and even had like a podcast with the girl's voice on it. So one of the things that we have to understand is that there are people who will get, as journalists, there are people who will get value out of that. For them, that is value. They will take that, they will edit it, they will sell it, they will share it on their message boards. They have, very, very, very interesting online platforms. And, just something as little as sharing a child's face or a child's picture. And some of these very innocent pictures that we have of children, wearing, just their diapers, running around. We actively, and it's a very difficult place to put yourself as a journalist. You actively have to look at this picture I am taking. How would a sex predator take this picture? Because that's the thing that will make them latch on that content and then sell it. So basically what you're doing is you are actually doing a really good, very straight up story. You're doing something very noble, but then you have given someone else something that they can then create, salacious material out of. And that is very important. So as journalists, I think the first thing to do is that you have to understand what is the mindset of a sex trafficker, of a child trafficker. What is their mindset? What is it that they look for? What kind of content do they sell? What kind of content do they traffic in? Because once you know that, you know what pitfalls to sort of avoid. The other thing that we've been able to do, especially with Jenny and with Michelle within our, as we're telling our stories, is that we've been able to reach out and say, hey, we're working on this story. Can you please have a look at it and let us know if there's anything that we need to change? And that is very, very important, because you might not be an expert and you might not know whether what you're doing is right or wrong, but if they're able to look at it and say, okay, this is fine, but I think if you change this, it would be better. These are the pictures that I want to use. I don't think this is right. Are there any identifier? Because this is what they've studied and this is what they know. The other thing that we have to be careful with as journalists is that on social media, we have very huge followings. We've got a lot of power. So when you're seated down and you're retweeting images of children, talking, or videos that people have taken, I remember seeing an image that was being shared around social media at the beginning of this month, where a young Nigerian girl, 3 months old, had been assaulted by her father, and people were actually retweeting and resharing that photograph. Ask yourself, what is the value of sharing this content? Because by sharing this content as a journalist, you actively give this voice. People will then share it more, will then talk about it more. There are ways to talk about it without having to show these images of these children after they've been assaulted, right? So it is about you thinking very carefully about the content that you're producing and allowing yourself to collaborate with CSOs and organizations that are experts in this, and talk to child lawyers. If I write this story the way it is, what does it do to this child in the future? Not just now, but in the future. And one of the first things I tell people is, it's not normally not good to center yourself in your stories, but ask yourself, how would you feel if this was your child? What kind of images would you want shared? What kind of information would you want shared about you and your family? Right? So if you think about it in that perspective, you then begin to actually look at doing the least harm to these people, to these children specifically, and their families, and also not giving these people who are stealing content, and resharing it and selling it and making money off of it. Because to be honest, the moment I listened to this journalist's story, I knew for a fact that it would be remarkably easy for someone who does any sort of this kind of content creation, to create this content and turn it into something that they could sell and make money off of. Because the interview was done in the girl's own voice. Like, that's how bad it was. So think, you really, as a journalist, as much as you're writing about this, you have to do research on what are the mindsets. Who is a pedophile? What is a pedophile? How do they work? How do they react? How do these people who are online work? And all these stories are there online. The kind of mindsets that they have are there online. And when you sit down and think about the people who have been arrested, one of the things that everybody will say about them is that, I don't believe this about this person. They're very quiet. You can't tell. Right? So I think, Jennifer, it's about collaboration with CSOs and experts around child rights, to be able to look at your content. So it's not censorship, but to be able to make sure that someone who knows what they're talking about is going to be able to look at that. The second thing is, think about how your content can be used. And I say this a lot, beyond just child trafficking, but also spreading misinformation. Can your content be used to spread sort of like pornographic or exploitative content? And if the answer is yes, change something. Find someone to tell you, I have this story to tell. How can I tell it without traumatizing and without objectifying this victim? Jenny?
Naima, that's very, very useful, and I will come back to like how as media we need to do our stories. There's huge conversation going on in the Q&A. For the rest of you who are feeling, I don't access the chat, how can I talk? So there's a whole conversation going on the Q&A section, people contributing to this conversation. So go on. And if you're watching us on Facebook and YouTube, do it on the chats. And we're going to get back to your comments on Facebook and YouTube. And for those ones who are commenting on the Zoom platform, go on and have that conversation. I'm going to read some of the conversations much later. Mariana, I know you work in the media space, especially in the digital space. And as Naima says, you're one of the many content creators for children, and your content is very unique because you actually is it advertise or is it broadcast vulnerable children? You'll have to help me there before I mess up your brand. So how do you ensure that children are protected, especially those vulnerable children that you post every day?
Media stories about children, and I would look at on our end at Missing Child Kenya, because some of the children who end up missing on our database may have been trafficked for one reason or the other. So these stories are heart-wrenching, and they are also intriguing. And as a community or as the audience, we form our own opinions of the child who is absent in this time by the details that the media has shared with the public. And so often, the very same details that I use to find a missing child are always in direct conflict with the child's privacy rights while they are away. So how do we decide on what to share as Missing Child Kenya? A child only loses their right to privacy when they go missing and their whereabouts are unknown. So at this point, it is logical to reveal their identity so that the public may quickly identify the child being searched for. So when it comes to the images, we are obliged to share this image as Missing Child Kenya, because then through this image is how this child will be identified. But then as we went on sharing these images, we realized that people in the online space also post jack. They take that image, they put it on a page of theirs, and they just say, share about this child, follow this page. You never know, you'll reunite this child with family, follow our page. And over some time, it will start as a page of community, then 10 days later, you'll find it is a page for something commercial, but they used a post of a child because they know all the women within their demographics will follow. So what did we start to do? We started to watermark these images so that we are sure that our image goes out with a certain indicator to tell the public that this image has been verified by Missing Child Kenya. So once a child has been found, of course, they regain their right to privacy. And this is one of the reasons why at Missing Child Kenya, our posters do not reveal the details of where this child was found. When a child has been found, we just say, child found, thank you, and please keep on helping us find these other children. And this brings a lot of uproar in the online community, because these are the same people who were helping you in the search, and they say, why don't you want to tell us? People want gossip, people want juicy information that they will use to affect this child. And so the rights and interests of these children need to be protected at all times. And so people tell us, why don't you share these reasons? We give them a few things. We tell them the families need some privacy to heal together. Some of these cases, if we share more information and this child was part of a trafficking ring, it will put the child more at risk. The child may be undergoing some medical treatment or attention that they need their privacy at this time. Making that recovery experience subjective about this child affects them as an adult. No one wants to be known as the child who went missing in certain circumstances. And so we have tried to look at the best interest of the child in terms of how we disseminate this information about the children. I've seen a very good point by someone in the chat, in the Q&A box. They called it also, again, ensure best interest determination. This is Harriet Kerwegi. And so it's a challenge, but then how do you protect this interest of the child? Now, people will tell us, how will we know the trafficking trends? We will tell them, we will not make a reason subjective. I will not say that because this child was stolen from Kibera, one of our major, one of the big slums in Nairobi, and sold in Mombasa for sex trafficking, so this child is one of the links. We will say in our annual report that out of all the 100 cases, 40 cases were of sexual trafficking of children of this age and this age. In that way, we are giving certain demographics that are still helpful without exposing the children. And so for me, that is a fight that I stand for. And no matter how sensational a story is, or no matter how big a report or a media house is, because sometimes as a smaller journalist, you could be a field reporter or you could be doing your own investigative story, and maybe the big boys come to you and they tell you, now give us the juice and we'll make this big. You will win African Journalist of the Year award. That is where also at my point I say, we will not sell our souls. We will not sell the souls of children to get awards. We will still stick to the principles of our ethics and protect the privacy of these children, because even as journalists, we are normally trained and we're told, number one, protect your source by all means necessary. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mariana. You've mentioned something that I want us to delve into for the next couple of questions. You've mentioned about principles, okay? And I know the best thing about this conversation, I'm a social worker and a trained communication person. And one of the things that we insist, like when you're working with children, is safeguarding children, okay? And over and over again, like having a child safeguarding policy and stuff like that. So my question is, I think I'll start with Shelleen and then go back to all of them. Shelleen, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm there.
So Shelleen, if you can probably tell us, as what, like, as a person who works for children, victims or survivors of trafficking, and what are some of the safeguarding measures do you take before you tell a child's story? What are some of the safeguarding measures that do you take?
Some of the safeguarding measures that we take as an organization is, if we are to run a story in the media, we do not actually mention names. And then we also don't put up faces of children in the media, because then that will be very dangerous for the child and also for the future. And then where we reintegrate the children and keep them in a rehabilitation center, we do not disclose where the center is, because then the children have to be protected in a safe place that not everybody can reach. So we have very strict guidelines on who can actually access this rehabilitation center, so that the children are actually safe and also have their privacy and also can heal without being disturbed by anybody. Because usually these survivors have a lot of fear, and then they cannot easily trust anybody. So if you keep allowing people to come into the rehabilitation center, then you will not get enough information from the children to disclose, and also they will not heal properly, because everybody is disturbing them and asking them so many questions. So when we are trying to safeguard the children, we do not put pictures anywhere, we do not mention their names, and also we cannot also mention where they are actually being rehabilitated, to make sure that they are protected. Thank you.
So the next question is more of an ambush, because I know this person has experience engaging with the media a lot. Damon, because I know you have been in many media appearances, on documentaries, on local and international media, talking about the work that you do on trafficking. So what are some of the safeguarding measures do you take, you yourself and as your organization, before you go to the media, or you give children an opportunity to tell their stories in the media? What are some of the safeguarding measures do you take? Damon?
Thank you, Jenny. Talk about ambushing. This is serious ambushing. Some of the safeguarding measures that we take is, number one is the child who is going to be interviewed or who is going to be engaged needs to be alerted and needs to be understand what is going on exactly, how they are being engaged, and how far what they are sharing is going to go, so that they can have an understanding. The perception many people have that children are too young, they don't understand, they need consent and all that. I totally agree with that. But a child also has a sense of understanding, and the child knows that, okay, I'm going to talk about this in this category. Okay, I have seen children be able to see what they're saying, to be able to see what they're saying, knowing that the group of people they're talking to is either the ministers, or it is the general public, or different other areas. Then also understanding that revealing the child's identity, the real identity of the person you're talking about, the child who's participating, the survivor who's participating, revealing the identity, realizing that this child needs to be protected, this survivor needs to be protected beyond the conversation that they're having. Yes, at that time it seems very easy and very quick to give, but later on the repercussions are either positive or negative. There are some things we can't control out there, and there are those that we can control within us. So safeguarding them from future exposure or challenges that develop out of that is equally very important. That's what I can quickly think about.
Thank you so much, Damon. So Naima, as you're doing stories as a journalist, and I know you work with a number, I can see your team is in the attendees. So what are safeguarding measures do you take when you're telling those stories on children, especially vulnerable children or children who have been trafficked, or they are victims, or they are survivors? What measures do you take to protect these children?
So one of the first things that I ask journalists to do is find out from their caseworkers what level of their what level of dealing with what has happened to them they're at. Because if you deal with a child who's just been trafficked, it might re-traumatize them, and that's not good. So finding out, before you even talk to the child, talking to an adult who has been dealing with them, with their social worker or their psychologist or their counselor. I think that's one of the first most important things. And then knowing what you're asking about and letting the child and their caretaker know what questions you're going to be asking about, and allowing them to say, I don't want to answer this question. I don't feel like talking about this. I don't want to talk about this at all. The third thing is making sure that the journalists do not share any kind of identifiable markers on these children. So as much as you want to talk about where they were taken, if they were being trafficked, how they were trafficked, not talking about where they were from, what school they attended, even the name, sometimes not even the name of the person who trafficked them, because sometimes you have traffickers who are very, who are very senior or very prominent within the communities. Like Mariana had mentioned, one of the things that's clear about a lot of these people is that they put themselves in positions where they have easy access to children and where they can win the parents' trusts. So being able to make sure that you don't give anything that can be identifiable. Sometimes it's even in your photographs, a child's school uniform, or the name of or you take a photograph of them near a shop, or a very, that kind of thing. So making sure that they understand what things can put this child at risk, like what things can put this child at risk. And sometimes, and this is the thing that people, have to understand, as much as we're talking about trafficking, trafficking situations, sometimes even benign stories that we do around what happens to children in schools, when you're talking about bullying and all these things, the way this kind of stories are written, if you don't do them in a way that protects this child completely, that nobody can tell who gave this information, you actually open these children up to exploitation and exploitation and abuse moving forward. So and threats. So for instance, if a child has been rescued and they've mentioned Pastor so and so, or the head of child centers XYZ, right? And you put that child in, and this person knows that they're in court, but the courts have protected the child's identity. You put that in the newspaper. This guy can actually now start, the trafficker can now start, intimidating the family, intimidating the child to pull back their story. Someone has mentioned in the chat, in the Q&A section, about sensationalization. You can hear a story of 50 young children were rescued, right? Somewhere, and you want to sit down as a journalist and do that story and actually sit down and interview these children immediately. Sensationalization, and I guess like someone says, sex sells, that kind of thing. This sort of salacious sort of news will sell newspapers. But as a journalist and in your newsrooms, you have to be able to sit down and say, what does this mean for this child? You're going to sit down and try and interview a child who still hasn't gotten to terms with what they're doing, with where they are, with what has been done to them, where they still feel guilt. for doing what they needed to do to survive until they were rescued. So one of the things that I ask journalists to do is to not push or chase that sensational story at all. To sit down and work with, law enforcement, and to work with the CSOs and these children to find out when is the best time to actually have these interviews. Because I think for me, that's one of the most important things. So understanding, number one, the do no harm policy, try and make sure that our journalists understand what the do no harm policy is. And we try to make sure that they get as much training as possible around it. Number two, working with the people who are taking care of that child and treating this child the way you would treat a politician. If you want to set up an interview with a politician, you just don't turn up with questions from nowhere. You share the questions in advance. Treat those children with the same kind of respect. Share the questions that you want to ask them in advance and let them tell you comfortable questions. Do not come in with your own, mindset about what could have happened, whether or not they were, there's this thing that people say, for those who speak Swahili, wasichana wanadanganywa na chips na sausage, right? Do not take in those prejudices into your interviews. Leave them at the door. Sit there and realize that you're dealing with someone who's been traumatized, who's gone through so much. Respect them, respect their path that they've taken so far, and respect the path that they're going to take in the future. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Naima. I'm going back to. Yes, I've seen her, and I want her to contribute, but I want her to contribute from the perspective of local, local, and how do we safeguard children, especially the identity and stuff like that. And Marianne.
Okay, thank you. I wanted just to add on a little bit to Naima's point, and I was also just looking at how to handle the child survivors and handle their stories. And also Alan Tumwesije, I don't know if I've pronounced this correctly, was asking about sometimes children are willing to give an account of their survivor stories, and then a few weeks or a few months or a few years later, they regret it and they still go back to re-traumatization. So how can CSOs handle that? I wanted just to share it from this point that best interest of the child is also a tailored concept based on your organization's objectives. We cannot all have a blanket approach in terms of what is the best interest of the child. As you have seen, my organization must share images of these children online. And so our BIC concept is a little bit different from other organizations. But again, within customization, find the ethical points and get the values that you stick with as an organization. For me, I'm a firm believer of letting a child tell their story at the age of discretion, where they are adult enough to be able to know that by me telling this story, I am fully aware of the consequences and all that. And I must say the Western world has embraced that concept in so many ways or the other. You only also sometimes largely hear survivors giving a full account of their story when they are adults of age of discretion. I'd like to give one example of a lady that all of you can be able to follow up. If you look online, you'll find a website called aliciaproject.org. Alicia was one of the first documented victims of internet-related child abduction. The abduction took place in 2002. She was kidnapped outside of her house. She had been lured and groomed by a predator. The 38-year-old man transported Alicia to somewhere where he chained her, sexually assaulted her, and live-streamed her torture for like 3 days. So FBI received a tip, and through this, they stormed the home and rescued her. Following a period of long counseling is when now Alicia as an adult is able to tell her story as an adult of concept. And she has been able to influence and even create laws. There's a law called Alicia's law. So for me, I also look at it in terms of this storytelling. also, if you are a journalist and you know you want to follow the story, be patient enough to follow this story and wait for this child to have an age of consent, or even a point where they've gone through enough to know that they're ready to tell their story. But then how do we know if they're ready to tell their story? So I always stick with age of consent, age of discretion. Back to Jennifer, you asked something about local content. I just wanted to look at this from a point of our role as journalists is to shape the narrative in our different areas. For each story that we are doing, we are shaping a narrative for that community. We are shaping a narrative for the lawmakers. We are shaping a narrative even for the children themselves. And so we hold very big responsibility as journalists using our pen. Our pen can be a weapon, and it can also be a shield. It can protect and also harm. And so for me, I look at it in terms of a lot of the times, again, we are doing so well. The fact that there's this group that we are having this discussion today, that means we have people who are using their pens as shields and not as weapons. But I would like to challenge us more so that we are able to look at it in terms of giving a balance to our stories. Let's not have a lot of reactive stories. Sometimes we only see certain stories make the byline or make the evening news only because they are sad and they're at the reactive end. Let us also have more proactive stories so that we balance this equation. And for these proactive stories, we are looking at creating local content, very localized content, because a lot of our audiences complain that they are consuming foreign content on child protection. So the onus is upon us to be able to create relevant local content. I'll give an example. I have published a children's book on safety, and this is from the information from hindsight that I realized there's a lot of wonderful safety information for children online. If you go to YouTube, you'll find a video telling a child even simple information like how to cross the road, but it will use terms that are not local to our environments. It will tell the child to walk on the curb. In Kenya, what we call the curb is what is called the pavement. It will tell the child to use a flyover. It use not a flyover, a walkover bridge. Here in Kenya, that is what we call a flyover. So if we take this upon us, even leaving this forum and going to create more local content, then we'll have that balance of more proactive content than more reactive content. And the platforms are big. All of us have the online platforms that we can be able to create a lot of this content and shape the narrative for the communities and also for the children. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mariana. Cecilia is back. Yay! Cecilia, are you able to talk? If you're not, just tell us on the chat. Because I know Cecilia has done some amazing stories around child trafficking, and it would be nice to hear her experience in telling these stories. Is she there? She's not there. Oh, shame. Let me check if Joy is in. Joy is not still in. So anyway, as we move on, I want us to as the theme for this year of child trafficking is those people in the front line. And I believe journalists, anyway, we have been told we are frontline workers in everything. We are frontline workers. So as we tell our stories, Naima, I will start with you. How do we protect ourselves? Naima?
Sorry, I forgot that I was muted. So one of the first things for you to understand how to protect yourself as a journalist is to first understand what risks you are at as a journalist. Trafficking in general is a multi-billion-dollar business around the world. And if perchance when you're working on some of these stories, you actually, start hitting on people who stand to lose a lot by the stories that you're telling, you stand to become a target. You stand to become a target of for some of this for some of these people. Something that people don't like, talking about, but it's discussed quite a lot is that you usually, for these things to happen, you usually have to have people in high levels of government and in, you know, the police forces as well, who are paid off to look the other way, or who are actually directly involved in a lot of these trafficking cases. So how do you protect yourself? The first thing is, how do you get your news? How do you get your stories? How do you plan your interviews? If you're doing this in an East African country on an open phone network, that is just a huge no-no. That's a huge, huge no-no. So one of the things that you need to be able to do is invest, and some of these things are free. So there's a tool called Signal, which I will put up on the chat if I can. It's called Signal, and what it is that it allows for encrypted communications, right? So that's I've just typed it in. It's called Signal. If you look for it, it allows for encrypted communications, where you can actually sit down and say, you know, send messages that can't be read. You can make sure that they're cut off. If you're going to see a child who has been trafficked, it would be good for you to switch off your phone completely, leave your phone where it is, and meet this person without having any sort of digital stuff on you. Make sure that if you're doing any research into any of this stuff, you're not working on an open network, right? You're not working on an open network. The Tor browser, which I know most people think that, you know, having the Tor browser means that you're getting onto the dark web. You have to have an IP address or a web address for you to get onto a dark website. And what the Tor browser does is that it makes it difficult if someone is trying to monitor what you're looking at and what you're searching for online. You can actually do that. The other thing is that you can ask your newsrooms, where I was working before, Code for Africa, have something called AfriLeaks, which they're giving to newsrooms, which allows for people who have news to share that information. It's built off of the Tor browser anonymously. So remember that some of these cases where they might be benign, there are some times where you might end up with working on cases that have some very huge organized crime, a lot of organized crime around it. Journalists have been killed, have been targeted across the world because of it, and especially because in countries that are that this has become like a major crime. Like I know in Thailand, it's such a major crime. Journalists have been targeted. And these guys are now moving into Africa because they think that, you know, we really don't care about our children as much. That is, for me, that is one of the things, making sure that you're aware about what kind of research you're doing. If you're researching Facebook profiles or Twitter profiles, do not do it on your own personal Twitter or a Facebook account. Set up pseudo accounts, set up fake accounts using email addresses that you don't necessarily, that you don't always use. Do not tie them to any of your original email addresses, so that even if these people are willing to try and start looking for you, they can't do it. You've made their work harder in the long run. For your own personal emails and your own work emails, please make sure you have two-step authentication set up for it. And then do not store any information on your phones, on WhatsApp or anything like that, or on your laptops. If it's on your laptop, make sure your laptops are encrypted. You know, find a way, you know, whether it's using like a cloud network that is encrypted, and there's some very good free ones. I can look them up and share them with Jenny after the call so that she can share them with you. Any of that sensitive information that you're working with or that has been shared with you by the CSOs, you need to be able to put it in a place that that someone who has malicious intent does not get to it. The other thing when it comes to your own protection as a journalist is your mental health. As anyone who's working in the CSO field will tell you, covering these stories takes a toll on your mental health, a very huge toll on your mental health. So you have to be able to sit down and process this. I know as Africans, a lot of people don't have the idea of making sure that you get, see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor. You need to be able to look at, I'll share something on the chat shortly, but you need to be able to look at when is this starting to get to me? When is this starting to affect me? Am I oversensitized to things? Am I getting angry when I hear certain stories? Am I, becoming, even if with my own children, am I becoming too overprotective? Those are the things you need to start looking at, the things that can point you to being traumatized by this. Because as much as these children are traumatized, the more of these stories you do as a journalist, you get traumatized. And if your mental health is you're not taking care of your mental health and you're not dealing with that trauma, because you do get PTSD, you lose the capacity to do the stories as well as you can. They start annoying you. They start making your life, to be honest, they actually start stressing you out to some extent. So the first thing I would say is be protective of your own digital security. Be protective of, what are you doing online and how are you doing your research? Be protective of your sources. If you're going to visit these children, if you're going to talk to them, make sure that you're protecting them as well. As you're communicating with them, make sure that you're protecting them as well. And then the third, and I think one of the most important things, is protecting your mental health and being aware that you, as you're doing these stories, you also need to process what this is doing to you as well. I don't know if anybody might have questions about this, then I can sort of answer specific things around it. Jenny.
Thank you so much, Naima. You've gone into details, into the nitty-gritties, which is very important. Oh, Damon has left. I wanted to jump for him to answer the question about how do you protect. Oh, Damon, you're there. Sorry. So Damon, so I want you to answer this question. How do you as CSOs, as you're giving out, because we need the media. Okay, we need the CSOs and we need the media. So I'm talking in two fronts, as a CSO and as a media. We need CSOs to tell us stories. But how do you protect yourself? Naima has said some very, very important things, like issues to do with following the money. You are making someone's livelihood to go away by telling that story. And you, as on the work you will do, you're rescuing the bread itself, because they're the ones who, the children, the ones which are being trafficked, are the ones who are creating the income. So how do you protect yourself as a source, as a source of these stories? How do you protect yourself as a CSO?
Jenny, it's a complex situation. Many times, as CSOs, as passionate people, as child rights activists, we usually go in and we are not even thinking of ourselves. We are totally not thinking of ourselves. We are not even thinking of our well-being. We are thinking of that victim, how we need to rescue that child, how we need to rescue that lady, that man who is being exploited. So many times you'll find that many organizations, that many people actually do not even have guidelines on how they should be protecting themselves and all that. But what Naima brings out, I'll tell you for sure, in Uganda, that has been a big gap. And having exposure with the conversations with Naima and many CSOs, we saw the vulnerability and how we need to protect ourselves right from when we're collecting the information, as we engage with the children. We're protecting the children, but we also need to protect ourselves. And even when we are sharing the information, because we also try to protect the survivors as we share with the police, as we share in the courts and in the different places. We share the stories. We still aim at protecting the survivors as they try to protect other people out there from being exploited. We are also protecting the survivors. But many times, as practitioners, we forget to protect ourselves. And it's because we're driven a lot by passion. But I do know that many organizations have had to set up systems where they are able to access services, debriefing services. There are those also measures that you put in the organization where you have this with team leaders, with team members. You have also time to just break away and just regroup yourself, gather yourself up, think through, unpack, which is not usually very easy because I can properly remember many of the encounters that I've had. And then if you actually your life is threatened and in danger, usually we end up telling people that are going, we will go live. We because we are passionate, we don't usually protect ourselves. That's something very key as CSOs we need to begin to think about, because if we are not there, then we cannot protect other people who will fall prey of that. So it's an area for us to grow and build ourselves up in. But I do know organizations have hired counselors, therapists to come on board to be able to give that necessary support to both the victims, stroke survivors, and also the staff members that will need.
Thank you, Damon. And Charlene, how do you protect yourself as you're working for children and you want to involve the media to tell this story? Because I think I've just sent out a poll. Please, people, to help us with this conversation, fill in the poll that has just been sent out. Because the media has been called the ears, the eyes, I think also the nose nowadays because of thinking, looking for the stories. So how do we ensure? Sorry, my child participation. You'll forgive me. So how do we ensure that you are protecting yourself, Charlene?
As an organization, we have a policy. So before we get the media, we can run the story in order to protect ourselves as the frontliners, at the same time, the children that we're actually going to discuss about. And then we
Charlene, your
can you hear me?
Your connection is a bit off. Are you able to repeat? We did not hear what you said. Probably it has come back.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better.
Okay. I was saying that as an organization in Champisi Child Care Ministries, we have a policy whereby before we actually speak to a journalist, we sit down and then know what exactly the journalist needs and how is he going to report this story. This helps us to protect the frontline workers and at the same time, the children that we actually want to talk about. And then also we have counseling services where we involve the social workers, and the social workers have a time when they go to unpack what they feel they're getting heavy on. And this helps them to actually protect and also help to safeguard their feelings. And as Naima said, that sometimes it really gets heavy on you. It's true that you really sometimes get very heavy. And also we make sure that before we go into cases and also working with a journalist, there is a feeling, there's what is called a feeling of urgency. Every time we feel we want to run very fast because of the passion that we have as CSOs. So we sometimes have to calm down, sit down, and then think before we actually run, because the feeling of agency makes you think that you can do it immediately, then no one do it. So let us protect ourselves, make sure that we are actually doing the right thing, and make sure that we are setting ourselves to sit down and think of what we are going to do before we run. So this way, we carefully know who to share with, and then know who to work with. Then we work or do an operation to maybe hunt for a trafficker. When you're working with journalists, we move with security so that no one's being harmed. Then the digital security is quite very tricky because listening from name, I know that we need to do a number of things to make sure that people are not actually. Hello? Yes, please.
You're breaking.
Okay, let me try and see. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So with speaking about digital security, I have some time about security name on discussing the different ways that can keep our phones.
You need to fix your connection. It's a bit off. We can't hear you at all.
Okay, let me fix it.
Okay. So as Shalini is fixing that, I want us to talk about media and CSOs. Where is the point of collaboration? And I'm going to start with Mariana, who has done it amazingly, being a CSO, working in the media space, and using the media space to talk about children who are missing. Basically, quite a number of them are trafficked. So Mariana, how do the media and CSO collaborate to tell stories of children who have been trafficked? To rescue those children, and to be able to reintegrate or reunite the children to their parents. Mariana? Mariana, you're muted.
Thank you. I personally operate on a principle that has become by extension a principle of my organization. There's a saying that says it takes a village to raise a child. And slowly by slowly, the village has become borderless and digital. So it takes us all. Even I've seen other CSOs have taken that mandate that it takes us all. So number one, in terms of what is considered as collaborative effort, is a joint responsibility of this child's welfare. Some of the values that you will communicate alongside when working on projects with the media as a CSO. If you do not present the value of protecting these children to whoever you are working with, then sometimes they may not be able to handle the story in the manner that you expect them to. So for us, we are keen on sharing the values of child protection and best interests of the child. And it doesn't hurt. A lot of us fear putting things on the dotted line. Written consent is very, very important. It is something we also ignore sometimes when it comes to the sensationalism, and sometimes media can come and sweep over you like a wave. And so you might forget to cross some T's and dot some I's. Putting everything in communication, especially the consent bit, has been very crucial for us. Number three, again, for me, it is pushing the narrative using our values. I must say, for one, I am very particular when I get called for a media interview. maybe because I also have the hindsight of being a trained media practitioner myself, and so I wear both hats. But then I decide, what narrative do I want to push in this story? And for me, the example that I would give is, if at all a media house calls me and says, this child that was missing and is in your database has been found, can we do a story with them to show people that this is a good story? I will tell them, this is a fantastic story, but in terms of the best interest of the child, this child has just regained their right to privacy, and we need to give them a little bit more time. However, I have over 100 children who are still missing, and their families would still benefit a lot from a media story about their plight. So would you consider doing this as we follow up on different angles? So lead the narrative as a CSO, and the media people are also always open to having a conversation and working on a joint narrative, because at the end of the day, everyone wants a story that has given the priority of the child at the forefront. So leading your narrative by taking control of it, having things documented on the dotted line, especially for consent, and just having a joint collaborative effort in terms of protecting the child is what I would give as some of the ways that we have looked on the connection between media and CSOs in child protection. Thank you.
Finalize these last questions. I think I will go to Neima and Damon. The question is, what is your message, especially during this COVID-19, to the media? There's this argument that it's not child trafficking is not happening because there's no movement. What is your takeaway? What are you going to tell the members of the public or media personalities about this as we go for and answer a few more questions from the attendees? Neima? Is Neima there, or she's speaking to herself?
I was muted. I think one of the first things that I will tell media personalities and the journalists who are listening to this on Facebook and on this call is, do your research. Understand what kinds of trafficking exist right now, and what kinds of trafficking exist that does not necessarily mean physical trafficking. Because of the fact that we're all relatively living our lives online, what risks are there for parents and their children? What are the things that can actually happen to children online? And report on this. This is reporting that I'm not seeing. A lot of parents have given their kids tablets and laptops, and they have no way of knowing what their kids are doing. Report on the fact that they can actually put in, child protection apps on their phones, put up child protection and point people to those resources that will give them step by step. If I'm on a Windows machine, or I'm on a Mac machine, or I'm using Ubuntu, how do I make sure that my children are not accessing sites that they should be? How do I make sure that they're not, I have a problem with my kids. All my cameras are turned off, but at their age, they're teenagers. They want to see themselves. They want to make videos. So explaining to them how those things can be hacked, and how people can actually then use that to exploit them, has been very important. I've not seen very many stories around that, around how parents, as they're allowing their kids to learn online, as the kids are dealing in the digital space more, to protect themselves. And you have countless stories across the world. One of the ones that I will give you to look at is a story that happened in 2012, is the Amanda Todd story. That was one of the first really big cases of sexploitation, where a child was exploited based off of an online chat room. And those are the kind of things that we need to be aware of. If you're in Kenya, we have I think a cybersecurity task force that is tasked with looking at this kind of trafficking. How do you how have you reached out to them and talked to them? Because those are the stories. Those are the stories that you can actually look at and share with people. Remove the idea that trafficking, because that's what people think. Trafficking means moving people from one place to another. Trafficking has changed. It has really, really, really changed. And as you're doing these stories, remember that in some cases, the parents themselves are the ones trafficking these children online. This is happening a lot in Thailand. It's happening quite a bit in the coast as well. I mean, I've started seeing a couple of things like this. So being able to reach out even across the borders and do research on what is there anything that has been seen? Are there any trends that have been seen? Report on those trends. And I think Michelle from Stop the Traffic is here. And these are things that you can work with. Also work very closely with the CSOs who are working with children and who are rescuing children right now, because they might have information that is not in the public domain that is important for people to know about. So do your research, be aware of what trends are happening. I mean, everybody was all about how people were hacking class Zoom calls to put, pornography on it. But then how do you, beyond that, what information are you giving the public? Because beyond speaking truth to power, I saw a poll that one of the earlier polls that was given on this, beyond speaking truth to power, your role as well is to disseminate information that can help the population in whatever languages protect themselves and make better decisions for themselves. So I think look for the stories that aren't being told. Look for the gaps in information that need to be filled. Jenny.
Thank you so much. Damon, for 2 minutes, because I think we've run out of time. Is Damon there?
Yes, I'm here, but I do not know if I would want to add anything to what Naima has said. I totally agree with Naima. Let us be able to tell the story, but not exactly what you want to hear, but tell the story of what is in the perspective of the survivor, or what CSOs are able to share with you. My own experience, I have been burnt in places where I am talking to journalists, and I'm trying to set just as the panel said. But even as you try to set the perspectives, the journalists decide, no, this is my angle of the story. I'm going to go with this negative bit, because unless it is very sad news, it doesn't make news. But we need to drive the story. And I like something that I learned last year, that as we tell the story, comes the story. Because many times we talk about the suffering, but we forget to tell about the hope that has been restored, the light that has come back, and the fact that there is hope even where the victims are coming from, the survivors are coming from. Tell the full story. Don't just stop at where you want it to end. Give the full story. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. There's a question, I think, Mariana, you'll answer this one. It's on children on the move, some from Harriet. And she's asking, how can you report children on the move? These are not necessarily children who are trafficked, because often these children are looked as perpetrators, or that's a very huge word, I cannot be able to read it, belligerents, and not as victims, and who should be protected, where there's no legal framework to protect them. These are children on the move, are children in refugee settings, children, they are moving without parental responsibility or an accompaniment. How do we report stories of these kind of children in a way that you're safeguarding them, but ensuring that their stories are told?
Okay. For children on the move, or children without defined care or accompaniment of adults, I would look at it from the conversation that we have had largely in the course of this webinar has been around finding angles that can be able to highlight their plight without really demeaning them. And when we started, I spoke about my understanding of child protection going towards children's rights specifically. And so I would look at it from the point of then, what rights are these children being denied in the space that there are children on the move? And from this, we have seen some good feature stories have come out of certain refugee camps where someone highlights something amazing children are doing there, or on the opposite, what these children are lacking by being in this temporary setting. And so it would be to look at all their rights encompassed, what rights they are being denied. Of course, they're being denied very many rights, but picking a story angle that is aligned to where you'd be able to serve your mission of saying these children might not have a voice, or they might not even have a country or a home or a law that can support them. But at this point, they are looking at the universal instruments of human rights, and they're lacking these human rights. So highlighting their stories based on the universal human rights that they're being denied.
Sorry, I'm talking to myself.
Jennifer,
Thank
back to you in studio.
Thank you, Mariana, for that conversation. I want to thank all of us. There's so much. Like, if you've not gone through the chats, I would recommend you go through the chats as you are ending up this call. The Q&A is vibrant, and I'm running out of, I don't know. We don't have any more. We don't have any more time to answer these questions. But remember, this conversation is still going on Twitter. So the hashtag is Beyond and Within Stop Child Trafficking. So it's ongoing on Facebook and Twitter, on YouTube and everywhere. So go there, listen, comment there, and let's have this conversation. It's going on for until she's not here, Michelle, until 31st of July. So we are having the conversation every day on Twitter. It's every day, right? Michelle, it's every day, right?
Yes, it's every day, but then we have webinars every Wednesday until the 29th.
Yeah. And is it next week we have a special for them? It's
yes.
5 hours.
Yes, we have a special, a mini conference.
Next week we have a mini conference. It's going to be from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So you have to be ready. We are going to send out the registration link by the end of the week. Please register. If you're not able to join in, because you're going to use a different platform from Zoom, please, if you're not able to join in, please, you will be live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate. I'm going to ask my panelists to just, those ones who are able to just wave. The rest of us have bad internet connection, but we are so glad to have had this conversation. But the conversation still goes on Beyond and Within, hashtag stop child trafficking. Oh, God bless you and bye-bye.